Morning, sir. Your mic is muted.
Yes, good morning, Brother Golding, Brother Israel, and Brother McIntosh. We're going to begin at this time by going to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we give you thanks for another day that you have blessed us with. I pray that your healing hands will continue to be on Israel and on anyone else who might not be well. We pray that you may open our understanding to understand the scriptures and give us the ability to defend it well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to bring on your different responses to test number 1. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start with Brother McIntosh. And as I go through the test paper for each person, I'd like you to tell me if there are any remaining questions that you have on the comments that I made on your answers. So this is Brother McIntosh's test. Number 1, give any 2 fossil graveyards, Nebraska and California. All right, I'm going to come back to the question shortly, but let us look at what the test says about that question. Okay. All right, let me see if I can get this enlarged. Okay, my Zoom is slow. Let's see if I can get this here. All right, it's not responding as it should. All right, the question is asking in number 2, describe any 2 animal fossil graveyards. Now, I was asked a question by Brother Golding during the test last week. If he is to name the places where these fossil graveyards are found. And I told him yes. But in addition to naming the different places where these graveyards are found, the question is asking to describe the fossil graveyards themselves. In other words, what animal remains are found in these fossil graveyards? And it wasn't just to identify where these graveyards may be found. So keep that in mind. Or let me go back to the test that Brother McIntosh was doing. All right, so he reworded the question as give any two fossil graveyards, but that's not really the question. Describe any two fossil graveyards. Now he mentioned Nebraska and California. Well, I know that in the notes in the PowerPoint lesson, Nebraska was one of the places mentioned. Let me go back to the PowerPoint lesson and see what else, where else is mentioned as the places for these fossil graveyards. Okay, here are the fossil graveyards. Evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. One place mentioned is Agate Springs, Nebraska, which is located in the USA, that there is a fossil graveyard of about 9,000 animals and plants. And in mentioning the animals, these animals were specified. Rhinos, which are rhinoceroses, horses, camels, giant wild boars, birds, plants, and then mention is made of trees, seashells, and fish. So yes, name the place. That is part of the answer. But in addition, you were to describe what was in that fossil graveyard. Another place mentioned in the PowerPoint lesson is Alaska, which is also part of the United States. Siberia, which is a part of Russia. There were found a graveyard of bears, wolf, fox, badgers, saber-toothed cat, jaguar, lynx, mammoth, mastodon, horses, camel, antelope, bison, caribou, moose, elk, sheep, musk ox, yak, ground sloth, and several rodents. Another place mentioned is France. Hundreds of thousands of marine or sea creatures are buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects, and reptiles in a fossil graveyard. And another part of the United States is mentioned, the state of Wyoming. Alligators, fish, birds, turtles, mammals, many varieties of insects, and palm leaves are buried in the Green River. Okay, so that is what was expected for that question. But going back to the test. All right, so I put in the correction, Nebraska and Alaska or Wyoming, all from the United States, are places that are mentioned where there are graveyards. However, you were to describe what is found in those graveyards. Okay, the sixth question, how do you know that the fossils belong to a time after sin entered the world? This answer was good, because before sin, animals did not eat each other, but fossils have evidence of carnivorous activities. Carnivorous meaning the imprint of teeth in the bone, showing that an animal was killing and eating this other animal whose remains have been preserved. In addition to this, I would add the following. There is also evidence of cancer in the bones of these fossils. And of course, there was death. The very fact that there was death tells us that this belongs to a time before sin entered the world, because it is sin that caused death to come on nature. And after sin entered the world, animals started to eat each other. We know from the book of Genesis that when God created these animals, he gave them the green plants to eat. He didn't give them each other to eat. And we also know that before sin, there were no diseases. So all of these fossils would belong to a period of time after sin and death had entered into the world. Okay, number 3 is fine. No problem with number 3. Number 4 is also fine. Brother McIntosh, do you have any comments on your test?
No, only that question number 1, that one that I wrote, seemed to be an oversight by myself, a question oversight. Maybe when I rewrote the question, maybe if I had written it properly, I would have answered it differently.
Okay. All right. Let me move on to someone else's test. Okay, Israel, I'll go to your test. Okay, question 1 was answered quite correctly. A rock layer is named for a specific period of time and contains fossils from different time periods.
Brother Bob.
Yes.
I'm not seeing Israel's paper. I'm still seeing mine.
Okay, I think I know what's going on. All right. I'm going to try again. Okay. Okay, can you see Israel's paper now?
Yeah.
You can see. Okay, so Israel answers question number 1. A rock layer is named for a specific period of time. Now, this is what people who believe in evolution do. They say that a rock layer may be a period of time lasting for millions of years. Now, if that were the case, then you wouldn't expect certain remains of creatures that are belonging to another period of time. And what we find in the rock layers is that the same fossils are found. It's not like you have just one set of fossils in one rock layer and a different set of fossils more advanced than the previous set in another rock layer. What we have are fossils in different layers that are not thought by evolutionists to belong to that particular rock layer because they belong, they think, to another period of time. So what this shows us is that the rock layer is not being interpreted accurately by the evolutionists. It would not be a period of time, in contrast to another rock layer, which is a different period of time, that all of these rock layers were laid down at the same period of time in the time of Noah, when the earth was flooded, and all of these creatures which were not in the ark drowned and were buried quickly and turned into rock rapidly. We also know that these creatures were living at the same time because of the vast fossil graveyards consisting of animals and plants, which evolutionists have placed in different periods of time. Yet these animals are all mixed up together. How can animals and plants that belong to different periods of time be buried together in the same grave? That doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't really prove the point that evolution took place, that one creature that was simple in form became advanced at a different period of time. Question number 2, describing the different fossil graveyards. Notice what Brother Israel did. He not only mentioned the place where the graveyard is, but he also described what was in the graveyard. In Nebraska, in Alaska, which is in the United States of America, so he mentions 2 states in the United States, there is a fossil graveyard in which you have many animals and plants that have been fossilized, such as fish, rhinos, seashells, some trees and plants. He goes to another place, France, in which hundreds of marine animals were buried with amphibians, scorpions, insects, reptiles, etc. And then Israel adds this point, and this is the significant point. How come these animals may be found in the same location, the dead bodies in the same graveyard? They were fossilized in the same period of time. How is it they were found buried together if they actually belong to different periods of time? That's the point. Question number 3. How do we know that these fossils belong to a time after sin and death had entered the world? And this was a great answer. We can find the answer in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, in the time of Noah. God told Noah to build an ark because he's going to destroy the earth by water. And Noah took a couple of each creatures and put them into the ark. Then rain starts to fall for 40 days and nights all over the earth, and all the living beings, creatures on the earth and in the sky were destroyed by this flood, except those who were in the ark, where Noah's family and the animals were. So it shows that this is a really better period of time to date the fossils rather than in the period before sin had entered the world. Because we do find death. You wouldn't have fossils if there were no death. And before sin, there was no death. So you couldn't say that the fossils existed there before sin entered the world, because before sin entered into the world, there was no death. There is also evidence of cancer in the bones. Before sin entered the world, there were no diseases. And as Brother McIntosh mentioned in his test, before sin entered the world, animals did not eat each other. Question number 4 has to do with evidence that these different layers of rock were laid down rapidly and not slowly. There is the scarcity of erosion. In order for erosion to take place, something has to be around for a long time. There's also scarcity of the soil formation. In order for soil to form, the rock has to be around for a long time. There's scarcity of roots between layers of rock. In order for roots to be there, the rock has to be there for a long time. And it shows that these deposits that were laid down by water were laid down quickly, one after the other. And also the radical deformation, that is the great changing of the layers of sediment in which they are bent over, doesn't show any cracking or melting. So it shows that when these sediments were being bent, they were still soft, and then they quickly hardened and remained in that bent shape as rock. Okay, so that is Israel's test. Let me go on to Golding's test. Okay, this is his test. All right, so let me see if I can enlarge this. Some of the thing is missing here. All right,
Yes,
so
sir. I don't know how half of the paper is gone. Sometimes they send me my result. This is the outcome. So it seems like I'm gonna have to start to do it on Word document or something.
all right, okay. Okay, so in number 2, Israel, sorry, Brother Golding also mentions two countries.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Excuse me. When I did see that and that came up, so what it is, it's a formatting issue. I eventually fixed it by scrolling up to the top, clicking the top left-hand corner in the bubble and make the picture smaller, and then draw it over to the middle. Because what it does is that when you send a picture like that, it moves from one Microsoft Word to the other. The new Microsoft Word, like your computer reformats it to fit its what you call measurements. So you go to the top left-hand corner, you click on it, click on the picture once, so you're going to see the things come around it, and then you use the mouse to hold it and pull it across.
Okay, thank you. So we see that 2 countries are mentioned, France and Siberia, which are correct. However, there was to have been a description of what was found in France and in Siberia. Number 6, because before sin had entered into the world, let me see, let me just scroll this down. Yeah, because before sin had entered the world, there was no killing. So that shows that fossils belong to the time after sin had entered the world. Okay, that's basically it. Number 4, in order for billions of dead creatures to be buried in mud, there must have been a rapid movement of water for them to be buried and turn into fossils fast. In the burying and preservation of the fossils, raindrop marks were seen, so that shows water or rain was involved, covering these animals. In addition to that, Brother Golding, what it shows is that for the raindrop marks to be still there must have been a rapid burial of these sediments, because if the raindrop mark was slowly buried, it would have been erased, you see. So just like how raindrops might fall in cement when people are making a sidewalk and the cement hardens and you see the raindrops. So there had to be a quick hardening of the sediments that were laid down by the water to preserve the raindrop marks in the rocks that formed. Okay. So I have the correction there. You were to describe what, let me see. You were to describe what is in the fossil graveyard and identify, not just identify where they are found. The preserved imprints of the raindrops show that the mud and sand on which the rain fell turned into rock fast, or else the imprints would have been removed if the process of turning mud and sand into rock was slow. Okay. Brother Golding, do you have any question on your test?
No, sir.
All right. Now, Brother McIntosh, what you told me about the formatting of the photographs that are sent, I would like, I do not know, were you telling me how to correct it? Or were you telling Israel, Brother Golding, how to correct it?
I was anybody that's viewing it again, because Israel had also said when he sends it in Word, that's what it does. So it's normally going to reformat the picture based on the pixels of the picture. So you just either pull it across if it's small enough, or you make it smaller and pull it across.
Okay. Yeah, my laptop has a problem pulling things in different directions.
Okay, so that means you make an adjustment to the text wrapping and select none when you select text wrapping, so it will allow you to pull it in any direction.
Okay, well, we'll see how things go. It's okay. Thank you very much for your advice. We're going to be moving on to the new lesson today. Not that one. Yeah, this one here. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint title page? Hello?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, good. We're looking at the next lesson, lesson number 12. Do similar body parts and similar DNA mean one common ancestor or one and the same designer? Now, the reason we're looking at this question is that this is one of the arguments that evolutionists use to prove that we have all descended from one and the same ancestor. They believe that every form of life came from one and the same ancestor. Whether you are a human being, whether something is an animal, or whether something is a plant or a tree, they believe that every kind of life originated from the first living cell that formed in the waters that covered the earth in the past. And they argue that different kinds of living creatures have similar body parts and similar information that is encoded in the DNA of the nucleus of the cells. So we're looking at the evidence. Do similar body parts and similar DNA mean one common ancestor or one and the same designer? The general objectives for this lesson are: 1, to examine if similar body parts mean that all living things descended from one common ancestor. 2, to examine what the Bible teaches about all living things having one common designer and creator. 3, to examine the percentage of similarity between chimp and human DNA. The specific objectives are: 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have discussed 2 different points of view about similarity of body parts of living things and how diverse living things originated. Number 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have contrasted what the Bible says about the origin and the diversification of life, and the view that all living things have descended from one common ancestor. For example, human beings having descended from the ancestor of the apes and the humans, which is what evolutionists teach. Okay, so one of the often used arguments by evolutionists to try to prove that all living things evolved from one and the same ancestor is the similarity of body parts and of DNA. For example, at the bottom of the screen, there is the picture of an ape, and there is also a picture of a young man. And here is what they do. They say an ape has two eyes.
Okay,
two
Brother
ears.
D, Brother D.
Yes.
All right. What I am seeing on my screen is just the first what you call
The title page.
the
Yes,
title
sir. We're
page.
still in the beginning of
and-
apologetics.
Yeah, the
Trimester.
title page,
All right.
and it is not on full screen. It's on edit mode.
All right, let me try again this. Okay, do you see a full screen?
Yes.
All right. Do you see the general objectives and the specific objectives?
Yes, yes.
And do you see numbers 1, 2, and 3 and 2 pictures at the bottom of the screen?
Yes, I can see them now.
All right, good. So one of the often used arguments by evolutionists to try to prove that all living things evolved from one and the same ancestor is the similarity of body parts and of DNA. So they will say an ape has 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 1 mouth, teeth, 1 tongue, 2 hands, 2 feet, and a human being has 2 eyes, 2 ears, mouth, teeth, tongue, 2 hands, and 2 feet. They go further than this by claiming that an ape's DNA and a human being's DNA have 98% similarity, and claim that this proves that apes and humans are cousins and that we share one and the same ancestor. However, let us ask ourselves this question: do similarity of parts among living things mean that we have one and the same ancestor? Or could it be interpreted to mean that we have one and the same designer, the one creator, God? Now, we saw in biblical apologetics for year 1 in lesson 4 that the Holy Scriptures is given by inspiration of God. That is, God spoke to writers whom he had personally chosen and told them to write down what he told them. Therefore, when we read about the creation in the book of Genesis, we're not reading Moses' beliefs about what happened in the beginning, but we are reading what God told Moses that he did in the beginning. We saw also in biblical apologetics year 1 in lesson 5 proofs that the Holy Scriptures is given by inspiration of God, such as prophecies have been fulfilled, there is scientific foreknowledge, laws governing human behavior are different from what human beings would have written by their own reasoning and desires. There are one and the same teachings taught by over 40 different authors over a period of 1,600 years, and that this proves that God actually spoke to all of these writers, giving them knowledge that they could not have had on their own. Therefore, let us examine what the Creator says actually happened in the beginning when he created each form of life. God said to Moses that he created vegetative life on the third day of creation week, and that each kind of vegetative life was to reproduce after its kind, not change from vegetative life to animal life and then to human life. Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. Here's a picture of different kinds of vegetation. Number 5, God said to Moses that he created all kinds of flying creatures and water creatures on the 5th day of creation week, and that each kind of flying and water creature which have life was to reproduce after its kind, not change from their kind to animals on land that walk or creep, and then to change further to human life. Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 to 21. Now note well, evolutionists believe that human life evolved from fish life. But God said that fishes were created separately from human life, and that fishes were to reproduce only fish, but not evolve from fish life to human life. Number 6, God said to Moses that he created land animals which walk or creep on the land on the 6th day of creation week. This would have included the apes. Each kind of land animal was to reproduce after its own kind, but not change from their kind into human life. So apes were to produce apes, camels were to produce camels, giraffes were to produce giraffes, lions were to produce lions, and reptiles of different kinds were to reproduce reptiles. Number 7, later on the same 6th day of creation week, God said to Moses that he created man and woman in his image and likeness. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Therefore, all living things have the one and the same creator. They did not evolve from one and the same ancestor. Now let us look at the argument about 98% similarity between chimp DNA and human DNA. The idea that human beings and chimps have close to 100% similarity in their DNA is often asserted. Early studies based on a small fraction of the genetic code led to claims of 98% similarity. And this was back in the 1970s, when they started to study the genetic codes of human beings and other creatures. And in those early times, they only took a small fraction of the total genetic code and looked at similarities between one creature and another. So when they looked at the human DNA, just a small part of it, and a small part of the chimp DNA, they calculated that there was 98% similarity. Now, number 2, with the chimp DNA now completely decoded, the similarity, when all the DNA is included, is not more than 87%. That's quite a drop. That's about 11% drop in similarity, and arguably below 70%. So there are some who argue that the similarity is actually 70%, not 98%. The differences are even greater, for the DNA in humans has an amount of information equal to 1,500-page books. That is, you have 1,000 books, and each book is 500 pages. Therefore, even a 2% difference is equal to 20 500-page books of information. So if there are 2% difference, there is really a lot more difference than people realize, because 2% of the information in the human DNA is equal to 20 500-page books of information. Which chimp has been able to go to school, university, teach a class, speak English or French or Spanish, make a scientific breakthrough like human beings have been doing? And on your own, you can watch these websites that will give you more information about the so-called similarity of DNA in chimps to DNA in human beings. Do you have any questions and or comments on what we have looked at?
Let me ask you something. They
Yes.
said that, all right, for the DNA of humans to be to chimps, how much? 70. So let us say we're going to average it at 75 then, because of the discrepancies. How can we say that that is not enough evidence to say that there isn't some relation? Because, you know, in our culture, anything over 50% in similarity either has a direct or indirect relation.
Okay. Well, first of all, we know that there is a creator who has revealed himself and who has given information about the origin of life in the universe, in the book of Genesis. And in the way that the creation is presented in Genesis chapter 1, we see that each form of life was to reproduce its own kind of life. It is not written that one kind of life was to change into a different kind of life. Now, since we have the same creator, he would have followed similar designs in different living creatures. Just like if a person designs an automobile, he might put similar features in different motor vehicles that he manufactures. So you have different motor vehicles having similar engine designs, similar tire designs. Okay, but so we have the same designer designing different kinds of living things. So what I am arguing here is that not that there is not a similarity. The similarity is there, but how do we explain the similarity? Do we say that it is evidence that we all descended from the same ancestor? Well, that's the evolutionary interpretation. Or do we say that the one and the same designer put similar design features within different living creatures? Well, let us say the dog also has two eyes. The dog has a nose, the dog has a mouth, the dog has teeth, one tongue. So we do have similarities. The argument is not if there are similarities. We accept that there are similarities. The argument is, how do we interpret the similarities? And so I am saying that since we have the same designer, he put similar design features within different living creatures, and not that we descended from the same ancestor. Bear this in mind, the theory of evolution is an attempt to explain life around us without having to attribute it to a creator. who is supernatural and who can miraculously create different kinds of living things. So because they do not start from the presupposition that there is a God, and they start rather from the presupposition that there is no God, that the only things that are existing are material things, not spiritual things, they try to explain things in a different way, in a naturalistic way, rather than to say that there is a creator who put similar designs in different living creatures. And the point here is to show that there is not 98% similarity as was thought in the 1970s. They now know from their studies of genetics, their studies of the DNA that has the information encoded in the cell, that the similarity is not as great as they had thought in the 70s. And the point that I'm making in number 3 is that even if we were to take the 98% as still being valid, there would be a 2% difference. But that 2% difference might be misleading. It might look like it is very small, but even a 2% difference is equivalent to 20 books. Each book is 500 pages long of information that human beings have in their DNA, which chimpanzees and other apes do not have in their DNA. So there is still a great difference between the apes and the humans. Any other question or comment? Okay, now I encourage you for further information to look at these websites on your own and to study this PowerPoint lesson, which I will be sending you later on today. As you have on your course outline, I have scheduled a test on this lesson on Friday, February 11. So on Friday, February 11, next week, Friday, you have a test on lesson number 12. Do similar body parts and similar DNA mean that we all have the same common ancestor or the same common designer? Okay, at this time we're going to close. So I'll see you later. Israel, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So Israel is there. And who else is there with you in the room? Golding.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
good.